I'm now going to hand over to David Simpson to moderate our discussion between our two panelists. David?
Thank you. I was just trying to get my video on. Good morning to everyone. We do have a few questions to get us going in terms of the panel. So let me start with those. To you, John, if you're still there, I'm not seeing you, but if you're still there, what steps were taken to influence policymakers to make the changes that you referred to? Were there any consultations, and at what levels were these held?
We can try to send that to John by.
Probably logged off already.
No, no, they have some problems in South Africa with power.
Okay.
I can try to send that question via WhatsApp.
Okay,
and see if he's
fine so far. So if you can do that.
Okay.
Annalena,
what are the other two questions?
The second question was, my dad used to regale me with stories of him memorizing poems with long verses. With internet, students no longer memorize even 2 verses. What teaching techniques are required in our age to successfully promote memorizing long verses is the question.
And the last one?
And the last one, based on your experience working in different countries, what, if any, are the 3 main differences evidenced in terms of the repurposed approach to educational learning? Also, what would you say are the top 3 takeaways in terms of change management in this important area of education reform?
Thank you. And so then I would suggest you move on to Annalena. And Annalena, Annalena, if there are any questions that were posed,
a few for her.
No, just a moment. If there are any questions that were posed of John, it would be great if you could speak to any that you feel competent to do. So.
Thank you for your presentation, Annalena. We do have a few questions based on your presentation. How receptive were students to the changes made with respect to the transition to online learning, especially during the COVID pandemic?
The students that I have involved in the Global Svenska part, they were used to online learning. It wasn't a very big change for them. As I said in the speech, of course, it was different to stay at home all the time, and of course, it was sometimes difficult for some of them to get up in the morning and to do things if they were not really forced to do it by classes by Zoom or other things. Because if you have the online learning, if you have the distance learning where you're supposed to write things and send it away, then maybe you could, when you're a young person, or even when you are 54, you could somehow feel that you could do that later. So that was a problem to all, I guess. But as we teach only using Zoom or Teams or other video conference tools, so we have our students in a schedule. They come, they do it on time, and they are meeting their friends in their groups, which was not a big problem to them. I know, however, that many, especially girls, as you asked about if there were any gender differences, especially girls, they when they work with distance learning and the online learning without the classes, they are supposed to write so much. That is what you do, and they write, and then they spend so much time writing that they do not sleep the way they should, whereas boys, this is only my opinion, had a tendency not to write as much. They might even write a little less than they should. So there were some differences in that aspect, I think. We could also see, at least from my point of view, we could see some differences in how you managed the social life outside school. I work with people who do not live in their own country. They live abroad, and many of them have family, of course friends, but mostly family living on the other side of the world, and they couldn't meet at all. Even though you have these connections that we have now, it's not at all the same thing. You can't, as I sometimes say, I can't see your feet, I can't feel your breath. I mean, it's really different. Even if it's better to do it this way than it is to just write some messages in somewhere, it's still we are human beings. We're supposed to be together.
The question focused on the receptiveness of students, but what has your experience been in terms of the teachers on the other side of the spectrum in terms of online learning?
Most teachers hated it, at least from the beginning. At the beginning, they were so. The ones that I met in my workshops, some of them even panicked because they thought that now we had to be some YouTubers, we had to do the perfect videos with pictures everywhere, and we had to look like movie stars all day. And also they were very much concerned about how to use time. In normal classrooms, you might say something at the beginning, and then the students, they spend 20 minutes writing, and during that time you can correct some papers, or you could do different things. But now you can't do anything. You have to spend so much time preparing these classes, and then you have to be so extremely active all day, and then in the evening you're supposed to do it again, prepare for the next day. And this is, of course, very hard work. It's really, really hard work. And also you have to work extremely hard to meet all students so that you really communicate with each and every student. And when in my workshops, I was really I showed them methods how to do this, with giving each student a number of seconds to do things and to work with breakout rooms all the time, and also to actually do some other things than just showing YouTube links. For instance, there's nothing wrong if you are not good at using the whiteboards that exists, for instance, in Zoom. Then you can have a piece of paper, you can take your pencil, you can write things, you can draw things, and you can show it to the students, and they will understand. So you shouldn't do it I mean, the best thing is just to be good teachers, to be knowledgeable and to be active and energetic.
I think a big part of what came out yesterday, and even from your responses, is that there's a certain level of adaptation and change management that is required when it comes to the future of education. Another question was in terms of gathering evidence. Has any evidence been gathered in terms of the differences in terms of receptiveness to the changes and also the outputs or the results across the two genders? And you alluded to it a little bit just now, but would you like to expand a bit more?
When it comes to grades, at least within the IB system as well as in Sweden, we couldn't see a big change actually, but that was due to the fact that the national tests in Sweden, we didn't have them, so that was a way of losing that, of dealing with that. And also when we look at the international baccalaureate, they had some schools had the tests, most of them they did not have the tests in the first semester, and then after that the test they do not have as many papers for the final tests as they have had, which means that it's difficult to see from data how much knowledge the students have lost, but I think they have lost some, yes.
Okay. John, welcome back. We have a few questions for you.
Yeah, I heard a little bit of
Okay.
this question, and I was thinking about them, but I found them quite difficult.
I think so too. I saw them.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
The first one was asking in terms of what steps were taken to influence policymakers in making the required changes.
Sorry.
Consultation.
Yeah. Before we get to that question, let's go on to the one about memorization.
Yes.
What was that question?
And one said, my dad used to regale me with stories of him memorizing poems with long verses or passages, I guess we could say. With the internet and students being online, they no longer memorize even 2 passages or 2 verses. What teaching techniques are required in our current age with technology and so on to successfully promote the memorization of passages and work and verses?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Memorization is something that I've thought about recently, actually, and I'm particularly talking about memorizing the times table, for example. But one might ask, is there a place, first of all, is there a place for memorization? Because we know that certainly in the past and to a certain degree in the present, you are expected to a certain extent, regurgitate what your teachers have taught you in the classroom. So there's a degree of memorization in most kinds of examinations or forms of assessment that students have to do currently. And we all know that. I remember myself when I was at school memorizing 2 exercise books of notes for my history O-level examination. And because I managed to memorize most of it and regurgitate all of it, I managed to pass that exam. But did I understand history? To this day, I'm still struggling in that subject, I think. But in terms of memorizing poetry, as this person referred to, particularly, and perhaps quotations from certain texts, and she's talking about certain techniques one might employ in the face of the kinds of social media that one can just access without having to memorize anything. Is there a place for memorization? Yes, there is probably. And I think if you use, I'm not sure if teachers still do this. I'm sure I use certain kinds of techniques in my classroom when I asked students to memorize certain passages of poetry when I was teaching A-level English. And I simply said, memorize those passages, and the students went away and did it. Now, you can use particular techniques in the classroom. You can perhaps think about rhymes. You can think about creating songs. You can think about certain other mnemonic techniques for memorizing. But I'm not sure if there's a huge place for memorization. Perhaps certain small aspects of what one would possibly want students to remember, to maybe quote a passage from a poem or a particular text. I'm not sure beyond that, aside from perhaps memorizing one's times table, that there is a place for memorization in education. That's what I have on that question. I hope that's
yes, very well,
clear.
very well answered. So one of the other questions was, based on your experience working in different countries, what would you say are the 3 main differences, evidence in terms of the repurposed approach to educational learning? And what would you say are the top 3 takeaways in terms of change management in terms with respect to educational reform?
Well, So that's quite a complex question. And I would think, and let's take this idea of change management first of all. And I think a lot of, and let's be very specific. When I was principal of particular schools in China and Malaysia, my teachers there had certain fixed ideas about what teachers do and what teachers are. And I introduced the idea of debating certain basic issues, such as what learning is, what teaching is, in the time allocated for staff meetings on a weekly basis. So people, my teachers had every opportunity to debate issues of that nature, to do with learning, to do with teaching, and to come up with certain ideas which may have been unfamiliar to them. Of course, I would introduce certain aspects of my teaching and my experience. But I found that the more I asked teachers to go away and think about certain things themselves and come prepared to talk about issues and to see things perhaps in various lights, various different lights, and to be involved in the process of actually thinking about how to approach certain aspects of the curriculum themselves and giving them the opportunity to make an input. I think this, to a certain extent, helped them when it came to taking on board techniques of teaching in particular, which may have been alien to them. And I'm particularly thinking of my situations I found myself in both in Malaysia and China in this regard. There was obviously some resistance to change, but the important thing here, I think, was to take on board how teachers felt about how their approaches to education, their approaches to teaching, and to allow them to make their input and to lead the conversation, and also importantly, above and beyond what I've just said, to organize workshops which were teacher-led. And this helped us, I think, in terms of using different approaches in the classroom and getting some value from that. Okay.
Thank you so. Annalena, I want to come back to you for a moment. Sweden is known for retraining as soon as students or workers complete one area of formal education. This requires a clear education policy as well as availability of adequate resources. How would you comment in terms of that query or suggestion?
Could I, is it in writing somewhere so I could check it again?
It may be on the YouTube, so let me just read it for you slowly again.
Yes.
The question is referencing Sweden being known for its ability to retrain students and workers as they complete various aspects of formal education. So the query, I believe the full question is, what type of education policy and resource availability is required to support this approach?
I'm not sure I can answer that one. Sweden is, as education is free in Sweden to everybody. It doesn't matter if you are young or if you're an adult. You can always go to university for free. You can have, it's a financial system that is very, I would say, generous. So the only thing that could keep you out of the system in terms of not going further is that you're not interested in doing it because you're happy with what you have. It sounds like I don't know, utopia, but it is in some aspects. What is it that keeps you from not being part of an education system well, of course, you might hate reading, or you might hate, and we also, of course, we need people who work with other things. We need vocational trained people as well. So I'm not. I think there are personal aspects that refrain people from not going fully into the system, and of course, the need of the society. The society needs different. Everybody can't be good at citing poetry. It doesn't help when my car stops on the highway. So I'm not sure if that answers anything of the question.
I think the main response there is that it's not so much an educational policy in Sweden, but strong economic and public financing policy, which allows easy access to all levels of training, including retraining. So it's more of a finance policy than education. Education benefits from a strong financial policy.
Yeah.
We have some more questions coming in. John, if you could speak to the positives and negatives that you may have identified of principals having more autonomy in the Asian context.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hearing you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that question. Principals having more or less autonomy within the Asian context. I must say that there was a difference, I think, between the principals in Singapore in particular, and the principalships that I actually was involved in both Malaysia and China. In Singapore, the principal's role was, I think, proscribed, I should say, by the central education, very centralized education system. Principal basically represented, in my view, the Ministry of Education, and the principal's job, I think, in Singapore seemed to be to ensure that the dictates of the Ministry of Education were properly carried out, and the principal did not seem to have any direct engagement with students. Whereas in both Malaysia and China, my experience there, certainly my job was not only to ensure that teachers were fundamentally carrying out their jobs to the best of their ability, but I was obliged to teach classes, at least 2 classes. And I found that connection with classroom practice helped me to respond to any difficulties that teachers had in the classrooms themselves. So yes, in terms of my experience in both Malaysia and China, I found that the head teachers or principals played a huge role in ensuring that not only the curriculum was carried out purposefully, but also that every aspect of a teacher's life, a student's life, was in fact monitored, and this actually worked, in my view. The centralized Singaporean way of doing things, it really made the principal's job something of kind of president or job in a country who was not an active president, but somebody who merely was a titular president, somebody who didn't actually take part in the everyday running of the particular institution. So that's basically my view, yeah, on that question.
Okay, thank you. Annalena, would you recommend schools opting to introduce student-led conferences with parents and teachers, and what steps would we consider if we went that direction? You're still muted, Annalena.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's
I think it's a good idea to try to implement this, because the students they become aware of their own learning, and they must be more responsible in their own learning. And I think if you want to implement it, you should use first of all structure. And I know I sound so boring when I always talk about filling out these forms and doing that and the templates, but if you haven't got them, you haven't thought about what to ask. And you have to write down, I think, what you would like to say, because then you're forced to think about it, and you're forced to prepare. And you should also use a portfolio system so that you can keep things to have it in mind. Or it's nothing that you should do just one day each semester to prepare for these interviews, but you should. The teacher will send reports. They will tell how you are doing in Swedish or maths or crafts, and then you get these reports, and you have your own views that you have in your portfolio, and then you sit with your parents at home, and then you're preparing comments on the report from the teacher, and also your own view of what you have learned, and why did I get an F in crafts? Was it because I thought it was a good thing of a good time for me to sit with my friends and playing with the I don't know, needles.
Getting sound, but picture.
I think it's a you're as a young person, because we start with this very early. You get some kind of self-confidence because we listen to you. You get confidence from being listened to about your own learning, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that. How would you say, Annalena, that Caribbean territories can adopt or adapt the Swedish approach to learning when we consider many of the constraints that our region may face in terms of clear policy, inadequate resources, especially in terms of technology and so on, inadequate financing to fully equip schools with all that they need? How would you suggest we can vary or adapt the Swedish approach?
This is, of course, a big thing to discuss. Sweden was a very, very poor country in the 19th century. Actually, 1/3 of its population left for the United States, and in the 20th century, maybe because of the school system, because people were literate quite early, 1800. Sweden was supposed to be a literate country, and we had a system that fostered learners, I think, and that's why we have got so many inventors, in my view. And these inventions, the engineers, this attitude, together with not being involved in huge wars, that is, of course, something that helped Sweden to be a prosperous country, to become a prosperous country. I know that this is not the case always in your part of the world, and you also have natural disasters, I guess, coming maybe more and more often, even because we have in our part of the world spent a lot of money in buying Mercedes and going by airplanes to different vacations and so many things. I wish I could say that I have got the solution, but when it comes to, as I mentioned earlier, electricity is something that is of course very important to have, and that is something that you have to build on. And then when you have got the electricity, you have got the power, you have got the logistics for IT and the infrastructure, then I would say that is the most important thing when we look at the future, because that is not so, you could do things quite, it doesn't have to be so expensive when you do things online. For instance, you can have teachers working, if you're a small school, maybe you could teach students at other schools as well, because you put them together in groups online. That is a good way of dealing with financial problems. But of course, as I said, in a perfect world, education is free. In a perfect world, it's a stable system, and you've got this economic resources, and that is not what we can see right now. But we have to look at the future as something that I mean, we can change. Of course we can. So why shouldn't you be the richest part of the world in 50 years? We don't know why you shouldn't, actually.
Thank you for that, Annalena, and all of your contributions. I think this panel has reinforced some of the concepts of yesterday, including entrepreneurship and innovation, because I think where there's lack of resources, we have to be as entrepreneurial and innovative as possible to bring a different approach and adjust what may be the status quo, so that we can extract the future we want from our education system and policies. So thank you once again, both to you, Annalena, and to John, for joining from Sweden and South Africa, respectively. And we wish you a good day, and thank you for your participation this morning.
Thank you so much.
Back to you, Yahira.
Thank you, David. And thank you again to our panelists for those excellent questions and observations from our audience as well. We see that we have a lot of interest in how we can make our education system in the Caribbean and Barbados more student-centric and have more student participation.